My last story is absolutely my very favorite story in the whole world. And it was written by Dan Keading, who's a storyteller in the Chicago area. And if there were fan clubs for storytellers, even though I've never met him, I would be there. Sign me up. There's just something, he's on very much the same wavelength that I am. And there's a couple of the books that I have that he's written, they just have the stories that I like, and he writes the way that I like to tell. And so maybe I'm channeling Dan Keading here. I'm not going to tell you the name of the story because that kind of gives it away. I'll do that at the end. Once there was, and once there was not. Sound familiar? Once there was a village, and in this village lived a boy. Now this boy's job, and everybody had a job, was to take the sheep out to the meadow from the village every morning to graze. His dog went with him, and quite frankly, the dog did most of the work. But he was there to oversee and make sure everything worked out. And he'd get the sheep out there, get the dog settled, and then he would find a nice spot, a nice rock or something to sit on, and he'd put his knapsack down, and he'd take out his lute, and he would start strumming. Because you see, in this village, music was very, very, very important. People would come from miles around to hear their songs and their music. And he wanted to do his village proud. So he would practice the song over and over until he had it just right before moving on to the next. Well, one day, he took the sheep just a little bit further up a valley than he had in the past. The grass was green, the grass was new, it was sweet, and it was very appreciated by the sheep. They settled right in. The dog scurried around, making sure everything was okay, and then he started looking for a place to spend the day. Looked up the hillside and he saw a ledge. He thought, this is a good spot. I'll go up on that ledge. I have a good view of the sheep. This looks very good. A little bit of sunshine. I think this is the spot. So he followed a bit of a path up to the ledge. He looked around, and indeed, he did have a good view. But there was a cave there, and he thought, oopsie, there could be something in that cave. So he poked his head in. He didn't see anything, and he thought, okay. Found a nice rock, a perfect rock actually, right outside the entrance to the cave. And he sat down, put his knapsack down, pulled out his lute, and he started playing. And he sang and he played until it was about time for lunch. He was getting a little hungry, so he put his instrument down and reached for his lunch, and he heard a voice from inside the cave that said, "Please don't stop." Well, the one thing he really wanted to do was to stop, grab all of his belongings, and head away. But he didn't. He sat there, he picked up his lute again, and he sang another song. And when he finished that song, that voice told him a story. And he sang another song. And the voice told him another story. And so it went on all that afternoon. Song for story, story for song. He heard stories of adventure, stories of romance, stories that were so funny he was rolling around on the ground laughing. Stories that were sad, that made this boy bring a tear to his eye. Stories of knights in shining armor, all kinds of wonderful stories. When the day came to an end and he started to pack up, the voice said, "Will you come back?" "Yes," he said, "I will come back." And he did for several more days. And every day it was the same thing. He'd sing a song, the voice would tell him a story. Stories for songs, songs for story. It was a wonderful way to spend the time. The stories he heard of the adventure, stories of romance, stories of promises kept and promises broken. Well, one day, he stayed a little bit longer than he had in the past, and the sun was beginning to come a little bit lower in the sky. And as it did, it shone into the opening of the cave. And as the sun was coming down, the stories coming from inside the cave were becoming more and more personal and sad, and stories of being lonesome, stories of having no friends or family, And he realized that the storyteller was the last of his kind, apparently. And he was really sad when he heard these stories, but as he looked in the cave, he could see more and more. And so he walked into the cave. And as the sun reached the cave floor, he saw razor-sharp talons. And they were connected to enormous, strong, trunk-like legs that went up to a beautiful, round body covered with shimmering scales that ended in a beautiful serpent-like neck with an enormous wedge-shaped head with horns crowned with a wreath of smoke. He was looking at a dragon. He listened to more stories. He watched the dragon, and as he did so, a tear fell from the dragon's face and landed on the floor at his feet. Well, he looked at that tear, and then he looked at the dragon, and he reached out ever so gently and touched the dragon's wing. Well, the dragon's eyes flew open. "Aren't you afraid of me?" he said. With my razor-sharp talons, I could tear you to shreds." And the boy said, "No. With my fiery breath, I could incinerate you." "No." "Why aren't you afraid of me?" And the boy motioned for the dragon to bring his head down a little lower. And they were looking nearly eye to eye. And the boy said, "I can't be afraid of you. I know your story." Well, for a moment they stared at each other. And then the dragon said, "Will you come back?" And the boy said, "Yes." And on his way home, he began thinking, this dragon would make a wonderful storyteller here in our village. And so the next day when he was there, he said to the dragon, "Won't you come to our village and be our storyteller?" "Oh, no," the dragon said. "I couldn't do that." "Well, why not?" he asked. "You see, your people and my people have been at war for a very long time. And there would be fighting, there would be pitchforks, there would be torches. Oh, it would be awful. Somebody would get hurt. Perhaps you, perhaps me. No, I can't do that." Well, the boy had to admit, "Yeah, I think he's right." So a couple days later, he was at home finishing dinner, and he heard his grandfather say something that was kind of intriguing. His grandfather said that people were not coming to the village as often as they used to, and there's large numbers, to hear the music. They were going somewhere else, and he didn't really know what was going on with that. So the boy thought, and then he excused himself after dinner, and he headed to the mayor's cottage, and he rapped on the door. The mayor answered the door, and the boy said, "I have an idea. Is it true that people are not coming to listen to our music like they used to?" And the mayor said, "Yes." "Well, I have an idea. I know a wonderful storyteller." "Oh," said the mayor, "that sounds good. I need to meet him." "Oh," the boy said, "this is a problem. He's shy. He's very shy." Well, the mayor, quite frankly, had never heard of a shy storyteller. But he was going to humor the boy, and he says, well, how can I meet him?" And the boy said, "I'll tell you what. If you wear a blindfold, so you can't see him, then maybe he won't be afraid. He won't be as shy." "Okay," said the mayor. So the next morning, the boy and the dog, the mayor, and all the elders took off to go meet this storyteller. Well, they walked down the path, out into the meadow. When they got to the base of the hill, they put on their blindfolds, joined hands, and single file went up the path to the ledge. There they sat in a circle. The boy went in and explained to the dragon what was going on, and the dragon came out and began telling stories. They were the wonderful stories the boy had heard so many times. They were the stories of romance, the stories of adventure, the stories that made the mayor and all the elders just roll on the ground laughing. And they were stories of promises kept and promises broken. Well, as the afternoon went on, the dragon stories got more personal, more about being alone and being afraid of dying by himself, and very, very personal. And as he was talking, a tear crept out of his eye and fell down and landed on the back of the mayor's hand. The mayor lifted up his blindfold and looked, and then he looked at the storyteller and he goes, whoa. He's still listening to the stories, and he turns to his neighbor and he gently pats her, and she lifts up her blindfold and she looks at the mayor, and she looks up at the dragon and she goes, wow. And so it goes around the circle until they've all removed their blindfolds and they're looking at the dragon. And then the mayor reaches out and touches the dragon. And the dragon's eyes open. And the mayor says, will you come to our village and be our storyteller? And the dragon looked at the mayor and looked at all the elders and the smiles on their face and the expectation in their eyes, and he said, yes, I will. And so they all got up and they started scurrying around and getting ready to go back to the village, and the mayor looked and he could see it way over there. And he said to the dragon, can I ask a favor? Certainly, said the dragon. Can we have a ride? And the dragon says, all aboard. And so they all climbed on the back of the dragon, including the dog. And off they went back to the village. Well, there was a bit of a stir as the dragon approached the village, as you can imagine. But when the villagers saw all the elders and the mayor waving and smiling and throwing kisses from this dragon, they thought maybe they would stay put and check it out. So the dragon landed in the town square. He got off, the mayor got off, and proclaimed to the whole village that this was their new storyteller. And the people were sure to come from miles around to hear these wonderful stories. Well, there was a bit of a party. Of course, there's always a chance for a party. And the dragon did start telling stories. And people did come from miles around for years and years. And when the time came for the dragon to die, as all creatures do, he didn't die alone as he had feared. He died with his head in the lap of a man who had once been a shepherd boy. The fears and the prejudices had been washed away by the tear of a dragon. That's The Dragon's Tear by Dan Keading.